To do, this is 46, I believe. We have two ear models, so we need to be able to identify all the features of the ear model, and then we have what we call the cochlear model. So this is going to be the last one that we do. We're going to start just by identifying features of the ear model. I'm going to identify all of them so you can label, and then I'll go back down the list and quiz you. Okay. This outer portion of the ear here is referred to as the auricle. Auricle. It's the second feature on the ear model, I believe.
It starts with an A.
A, auricle. Okay? This is your outer ear. It is designed so that it captures sound waves that are coming towards the ear, and then it directs those sound waves internally by way of the auditory canal. Now, waves from sound have a wave function, okay? They're not coming straight, it's a wave. And the frequency of the wavelengths will determine if it's a very high pitch or a low pitch, okay? So these waves will be coming into the ear by way of the auditory canal, and they will strike this membrane right here that's called the tympanic membrane. This is the tympanic membrane. What do we commonly call it?
Eardrum.
The eardrum. And this side of the eardrum is the middle ear. Now, one tube that I need to show you here is the eustachian tube. This is a tube that actually opens into the pharynx, and it does help to regulate the pressure in the inner ear. You ever been in an airplane, you had to build up a pressure in your ears, and if you swallow or chew, it kind of massages that tube and lets it relieve that pressure. Okay. This is your eustachian tube right here. Now, from the tympanic membrane to this area right here is called the middle ear, and that vibration that is perceived by your eardrum is relayed on to the inner ear by way of three little bones. Okay? So we have three little bones in the middle ear that are called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. The malleus is actually laying on the tympanic membrane. Malleus is shaped like a mallet or a hammer. And what you see laying on the tympanic membrane is the handle of the hammer. Okay? So, here's our tympanic membrane. And laying right here on the membrane is the handle of the malleus. You can take this out of your model. And what you should note is follow the handle. This is the malleus handle. This is the head of the hammer. Here's the handle,
Okay.
and this is the head. So if you're looking at this, here's the handle, and this is the head.
That's the malleus. You're showing us two different parts.
Well, I'm showing you on this particular part of the model. Okay? Now, if you turn this over, you can see that the malleus is attached to another little bone that is called the incus. And it's kind of shaped like an anvil. Does anybody know what an anvil looks like? An anvil is a very heavy metal structure that blacksmiths or farriers use to shape metal, and it has a cone on it. So they can make and shape a horseshoe. Do you see this cone-shaped structure right here? Okay, that is part of the incus.
Here, can you?
Can't see it on here very well. The incus is going to be on the back side of the malleus. So this is where I have to go around and show
Okay,
everybody
on your index finger?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's the incus, right? Okay.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah, I gotta get a picture of it for the group me.
Are y'all okay with this?
From there.
The malleus is time looking at this model, put it in your hand, look at it, orient it properly. So your malleus is the little bone that's laying on the tympanic membrane. It has a handle that's laying on the tympanic membrane, and then it has a head region that looks like the head of a mallet or a hammer. On the other side of it, it's coming in contact with the incus, which is kind of cone shaped. The incus is said to be anvil shaped. And this is the middle bone. The third bone is called the stapes. It is basically shaped like a stirrup. What's a stirrup?
Oh.
When you go horseback riding on a saddle.
It's where you put your feet on the
Mhm.
saddle, right? So is it kind of shaped like this and you put your foot
Mhm.
right there?
Yeah.
So it's stirrup shaped. Okay, so this is on the tympanic membrane. This is in between, this one is in between the malleus and the stapes. And then the stapes is actually coming in contact with a membranous structure in the inner ear that's called the vestibule. Does anybody know what we call these three bones collectively? The ear bones, yeah, but they have a name. It starts with an O, it's the ossicles.
Obstacles, yeah.
And these are part of your skeleton.
She's right.
You have 3 in each ear, don't you? You have 3 in each ear, so this is part of your skeleton. Okay, now, can you see that the stapes is right here? It's right here. So the malleus vibrates against the incus vibrates against the stapes, and the stapes is going to vibrate against this membrane right here, and that's called the vestibule.
This thing, what's this?
Show us on this.
Okay, that's on this model. Can you see the stapes?
The stakes is that tiny little one.
It looks like a stirrup.
It's
The vestibule here.
Wait, the States is where?
The stapes is right here,
Okay.
and that's going to be vibrating against this membrane here,
Okay.
and that's called the vestibule.
Okay.
Yes. A little bit clearer. All of this structure in here is membrane that is filled with fluid. Okay?
So could you say that again?
All of this is membrane that's filled with fluid. Okay? This is referred to in your textbook as the membranous labyrinth. What's a labyrinth?
like
A maze. It's like a maze. So
Have
this
y'all ever
is a
seen the labyrinth?
series. This is a series of membranes that are found in this temporal bone. This is covered with bone. You see that this is part of the bone right here? So all of these membranous structures here are embedded in that bone.
Is that carpet?
No.
So if they have to
It's
put
membrane.
tubes, if they have to put tubes in your ear because of the liquid, where does that at? Is that in there?
It's going to go through the tympanic membrane. We'll talk about that in a minute. We always talk about tubes when we talk about the ear.
They put it in your eardrum,
Okay.
and if you have so many sets, it can cause a hole in your eardrum.
The
and then you have to have
vestibule
surgery.
is the center of this membranous structure. Do you see where the stapes is? Okay, the stapes is touching the vestibule. Okay, now, the vestibule divides this whole membranous labyrinth such that we have this snail-shaped structure, and then we have these circular structures, okay? So the vestibule is between them, but they're all connected and they all have fluid in them. So, let's talk about this structure that looks like a snail. This is called the cochlea.
The cookie.
The cochlea. That is this structure that looks like a snail. Does it look like a tube that's coiled up and there's an apex, there's a point?
And that's like the cochlear implant.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is the part of this inner ear that's involved in us hearing. This is involved in hearing. Okay? Now, this part over here, these little loopy things, these are called the semicircular canals. They're called the semicircular canals, and they're involved in sense of balance.
Where are they?
These little three loopy things.
So if you have vertigo, that's what's in. Okay.
It's the fluid in the semicircular canals.
Okay.
Okay. Now, remember, this is the cochlea. It's involved in hearing. Right at the back of this cochlea, we have a nerve. What do you think it's called?
A cochlear nerve.
Cochlear nerve. There are actually two nerves back there. The biggest one that's attached to the cochlea is the cochlear nerve.
Vestibule nerve, right?
Yes, the one adjacent to it there is the vestibular nerve. So where do you think it's going to synapse?
From the vestibule.
From the
The
vestibule.
yellow thing is the vestibular nerve?
Both of these are yellow things.
The smallest one.
Okay, look. We have two nerves here on the back side, don't we? The big one is the cochlear, the little one is the vestibular.
Vestibular.
Vestibular. So one goes to the cochlea and it's involved in what sense?
Here.
Hearing, and the vestibular is going to the vestibule. What sense do you think it's involved in?
Balance.
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 So the big one
Balance.
is the cochlear?
The big one is the cochlea. Okay, so what, if you put these two together and they go towards the brain, what does this become? Look at your cranial nerves.
Oh.
Look at your cranial nerves.
It becomes the cochlear nerve.
Vestibulo
Oh, it's
cochlear nerve. And what number is that? 8. So this is your vestibular cochlear nerve, and I think we talked about it being involved in those two special senses, didn't we? That's because it has two parts. One goes to the cochlea, which is for hearing. One goes to the vestibule, that's involved in balance. Okay. Now, let's follow the vibration. Where's the vibration originate? Well, you got sound waves coming in and it makes this tympanic membrane vibrate, right? So if the membrane vibrates, which ossicle vibrates directly? The malleus. If the malleus vibrates up against the incus, is it relaying that vibration? And then the incus will vibrate against which ossicle? The stapes. If the stapes vibrates on the vestibule here, that vibration gets carried into the cochlea.
And then it goes into the little.
Okay? Now we also have fluid here as well. But the vibration is detected in the cochlea. We'll show you where that occurs on the other model. Now I want to talk about the semicircular canals for just a second. If you have this out of the model, you should see that you have 3 semicircular canals that are in different axes. One's like this, one is like this, and one is like that. So this one right here is going to have fluid in it. All of them are. And there are little receptors in these semicircular canals that can detect the movement of the fluid if you bend your head some way. Okay? So this one right here, when you do this, that fluid in that canal is going to move because gravity is moving it, basically. So it would bend those little receptors in there, and your brain would be able to detect what you're doing with your head. Does that make sense? This one back here, if you're doing this one would detect that movement. Okay? The one that's on the back side.
You turn side to side.
Okay, if you're holding it so the cochlea is here and the nerves are coming out the back side.
That's that one.
turn it around. Okay, so this one that's kind of looping out to the side, that would be the lateral movement of your head. Now this one right here is if you do this, right? That's that rotation movement. So between these three semicircular canals, you're generating information about what you're doing with your head, and it helps you to maintain your balance. Your brain can coordinate all that movement and keep you from becoming dizzy. Have you ever been in a situation where you were on a merry-go-round and you were going round and round and round? What happened when you got off? You were dizzy because what was happening with that fluid? It was swirling in there, wasn't it? Okay, that's why you get dizzy. It's because of particular motions that put that fluid in motion. But because of these three axes, our brain can coordinate all of them and understand what we're doing with our head, which helps us to maintain balance. That information will be sent by way of the vestibular nerve to the appropriate cerebral cortex region. Okay? What cerebral cortex region is responsible for hearing? Which lobe of your brain? Which lobe of your brain is responsible for processing auditory? This is from lecture.
Temporal.
It's the upper temporal lobe, remember? It's upper temporal. Okay, so that makes sense. It's right there by it. Okay, I'm not exactly sure about balance. Does anybody know where the balance center is?
Is it, right here?
That's involved in movement, but I don't know if that is involved in the balance. I know it's motor, but I don't know if it regulates the balance. I'll have to look that up.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, where the balance comes from? I'll look that up right now.
It's the semicircular canals. Which
Well-
part of the cerebral cortex is devoted to balance? It says temporal. Have you looked? We know that the hearing is here. We'll find out. She's looking it up. Okay. So, have we learned all the features? Let's name them. Okay. I'm going to point at something. You tell me what it's called. What is this?
Eustachian tube.
Eustachian tube. What is this?
Auditory canal.
What is this right here?
Tympanic
membrane. What is this right here?
Cochlea.
Cochlea. What is the nerve coming off of it?
Cochlear nerve.
Okay. What is this called?
Auricle.
Auricle. Okay. We have three little bitty bones in the middle ear. What are they collectively called? Ossicles. Which one is laying on the tympanic membrane? Which one is contacting the vestibule? The stapes. Which one is between those?
The incus.
The incus. So the vibration goes from tympanic membrane to malleus to incus to stapes to vestibule.
Is the tympanic membrane just that little bit right there? Or is it all the way?
It's all of this. If you take it out of the
It's got a handle.
model, the membrane is actually the white part. The membrane is actually that white part, okay, that's held in place. Okay? You can see that membrane. All right. There we go. All right, let's see. What is this central region right here?
Vestibule.
Vestibule, and what is this nerve?
Vestibule. Nerve.
Vestibular nerve. What are these three structures called?
Semicircle canals.
Semicircular canals. So all you have to do really is identify them, but you should know what they're for, and that helps you learn this. You're not just memorizing, right? You learn what they're for and why they stimulate certain signals. Now, we talked about the semicircular canals, but we haven't talked about the cochlea yet, have we? How it generates signals. Are you okay with the ear model? Okay. we're gonna go up to this cochlear model.
This top one or
The
the?
cerebellum.
The top one.
Oh,
The
sorry.
cerebellum is balanced. Well, that's kind of autonomic, right?
Yeah, it
It's
wasn't
autonomic.
really, all the stuff that I'm finding is kind of a generalized. Like it's not but she's right, everything's the
Well, I
same.
know that the cerebellum is involved in muscle tone and I guess balance too. That would make sense.
Yeah.
It says fine tunes movements there of the brain controls fine motor movement, balance, and balance and brain ability. So
Okay. Very good, thanks. All right, we're gonna look at this model right here. Now this model, and you see the picture there. Now remember that cochlea is like a tube, right? That spirals up until it gets to the apex. I think it has movement of fluid up to the apex and then it comes back down. Okay? So what this is showing here is a cross section of the tube. Does that make sense? Why does it not look like a tube? Is it kind of circular? Okay. So this is a cross section of the cochlea. The cochlea is the snail that's made of a spiraling tube. So think of this as maybe being a piece of the lower coil, the big coil. Okay. All right. Now remember I told you this was all membrane? Okay. Everything that's pink here is in fact membrane. Everything that's pink is in fact membrane. Now this coil is divided up into compartments. You've got 3 compartments. And you have membranes that do that as well. Okay? So we have 2 big compartments that we're going to identify, and all of this is filled with fluid. Okay? This biggest compartment is called scala vestibuli. Scala vestibuli. The top one here. Scala vestibuli. Just remember, both of these start with scala or scala. This one is vestibuli. This one is scala tympani.
So the big one is the
Vestibuli, and the smaller one is the tympani. Now all of these are filled with fluid. These 2 have the same fluid. This compartment here has a different fluid, okay? This compartment here is divided from these others by membrane. This whole region here, this wedge-shaped area, is the cochlear duct. This region in here. And this is the region that actually has the receptors that can detect vibration. Okay? Now, between the scala vestibuli and the cochlear duct, we have a membrane. And that's going to help to separate the cochlear duct from this one. This is called the vestibular membrane. Okay? On this other side of the cochlear duct, we have another membrane right here. This is called the basilar membrane. Basilar. So basically it's the base of this cochlear duct. Think of it that way. Basilar membrane.
So is it the pink part?
Yes. Okay?
Just that whole bottom section, or just from here
It's
to
just
there?
this
Okay,
pink membrane
gotcha.
right here. Like between my fingers. Right here. Basilar membrane. Okay? So because of the basilar membrane and the vestibular membrane, I have this another compartment, right? I have a third compartment. This compartment's called the cochlear duct. It has fluid in it too, but it's a little bit different from this. It has a different name, but just know that all 3 of them have fluid in them. In the middle of this cochlear duct, we have another membrane extending out into the middle of it. This is called the tectorial membrane. This membrane right here. Tectorial membrane. It kind of looks like a little finger extending out into the middle of the cochlear duct. Tectorial membrane. Okay. Now, before I get into the functionality of the cochlear duct, let's look at these structures over here. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but this is bone. This is that temporal bone because this is embedded in bone. This is all membranous. Now, here is a nerve. What nerve is it? Cochlear nerve, right here. Cochlear nerve. Yeah, it's blue. Now, up here is an enlargement that has the cell bodies of those sensory neurons. What do I call this enlargement? A ganglion.
Spiral is a spiral.
Now, it's calling it a spiral ganglion. I learned cochlear ganglion. And in the old lab manual, it's called the cochlear ganglion. You can name it whichever you want. Both are correct. I like cochlear because I know, yeah, it's the cochlear nerve, so I know it's the cochlear ganglion, yes. This enlargement here, and you can see these look like cell bodies, don't they? It looks like cells with nuclei, so that makes sense. And it is a cluster, which is how we described a ganglion. So if these are axons going by way of the nerve, what's coming this way? Dendrites. And my dendrites are going to synapse with these receptors right here. These receptors right here are basically mechanoreceptors. Something has to physically happen to them before they generate an action potential, okay? That would be the stimulus. If something touches or bends or does something to them. These are called hair cells. Hair cells. And on the model, this looks like they have little bristles right here, which are supposed to be the hairs. Now, let me tell you how this is working. If that stapes is vibrating on the vestibular, the membrane of the vestibule, does it make the fluid inside vibrate? And that fluid is continuous with the fluid in the cochlea. So if this fluid is vibrating, it's going to make this membrane move. It'll start moving, vibration. And if it moves, these hair cells, they might touch the tectorial membrane. And that would bend the little hairs. Does that make sense? Okay. So it would bend those little hairs, and that would generate a stimulus. That would generate a stimulus. And then that would be sent by way of the dendrites here to my sensory neurons on by way of the cochlear duct, the cochlear nerve to that temporal region, and it would be detected as sound based on the frequency of the vibration. Now, we do have some inner and outer hair cells, but I don't know that you have those in the new lab manual. You don't? They're just hair cells. Now, depending on the frequency, if it's a very high-pitched sound with a high frequency, I think the inner ones would be bent, and if it's a lower frequency, those are going to be bending on the outer hair cells. So, you should see that there's actually 4 areas of hair cells on this model. The ones in here would be the inner, the ones out here would be the outer. Okay, and that's what would generate that action potential so that we would detect the sound. And I think that's everything that you have to know on this model. Oh, organ of Corti, okay. Now, this whole collection of receptors and the synapse and everything, this whole general area is called the organ of Corti. This whole general area that is involved in generating those action potentials is called the organ of Corti. In the old manual, it called it the spiral organ. So the organ of Corti is basically this active region that's involved in detecting the vibrations and relaying it on by way of the cochlear nerve.
What is this? Spiral ganglion?
They're calling this one the spiral ganglion or the cochlear ganglion. You can call it whichever one you want. Okay, what do you think?